Hello, Uriel from Ninja Bear Studio here. Welcome back. In this video, we'll conclude the Opportunity System, talking about the camera animation that can be used by the Opportunity ability. Let's start with a refresher on where we ended in the last video. So if I hit play, I can attack the enemy a few times and then perform an execute attack when the enemy has low health. Everything works as expected, but the camera is a little static. If I go back to the Opportunity attack and add the camera animation asset, which is the one that we'll talk about in this video, we will see a camera animation playing when the execution happens. I'll hit play again, attack the enemy a few times, and as I perform the execute attack, the camera will rotate around the player character, providing a better view of the attack. And you might have noticed some camera shakes played with each attack during the execution too. So let's break that down, shall we? First, we should have some camera shakes that can be played whenever an attack hits. For that, I just created a simple camera shake for all melee hits, extending from default camera shake base. This asset is pretty simple and it's just applying some rotation on the pitch over 0.3 seconds, including a blending in and out over 0.1 second. It's something to add an extra impact when the player hits the enemy, and of course you can adjust this camera shake as you see fit. Later on, we will also revisit the attacks to add this camera shake to the normal attacks. We need two more assets now. A camera animation that can be located under the cinematics category in the context menu. This is the asset used in the execution ability, and it's a bit funny that it generates the same prefix as the contextual animation scene assets from the previous video, CAS. But anyway, and we'll also create a level animation, which is not really used by the Opportunity System, but it helps altering the camera animation using the level sequencer. This one is also located under the cinematics category. To create the actual animation, we will use the level sequencer. For that, I have a dedicated empty map, just with my character blueprint right at the center without any rotation applied to it. This is important because we want the camera animation to be neutral. In this map, I can open the level animation assets that we created a moment ago and add a camera cuts track, which helps previewing where we are in the scene. If I hit the plus button, I can add my player character blueprint to the preview. That's useful because shortly we'll configure the animation player by the character, so we can create a camera animation that matches it. I also need a camera in this map, so I can create the camera animation. I realize now that I already have a camera here, specifically the scene camera actor, which you can also add from the add button at the top bar and search for scene. We want this camera to be aligned with the player blueprint camera, so the animation starts and ends more or less at the same place. The scene camera actor is a bit different from the usual camera actor, and I usually prefer working with a different lens and crop settings, 12mm and 2.39 respectively. This is just about previewing the animation, so feel free to adjust the settings to something that you like. Once the camera is positioned, we can drag it into the sequencer timeline as well. This will change the perspective and we'll be piloting the camera. We can click eject to go back to the timeline view. I'll also remove the transform track, since I'll be editing the camera transform inside the camera animation asset. Now let's work with the animations. First, I have to configure the animation for the player blueprint. I can do this by clicking the little plus button and adding an animation track. The sequence should be the same one played by the execution ability, so I will match that. As you can see, the animation length is represented in a timeline now, so I can adjust the durations of everything so they are all aligned. And now I can also add the camera animation to the camera actor. I can do that by pressing the plus button on the camera, select template sequence, and then the camera animation we just created a moment ago. I can also adjust the length and double click it to start editing the camera animation. Now we are in a different asset, but still inside the same level sequence. This is cool because it allows us to edit the camera while previewing the character animation as well, like so. So now I'll add a transform, since I do plan to adjust the camera location and rotation. Then I'll scrub the character animation to find a good place to end the first camera movement. I'll create some keyframes at the beginning, adjust the transform at the desired location and rotation, and create more keyframes to commit those changes. Now I'll find another good frame to move the camera back to its original location, like this one after the second attack, and perform the same steps again. I need to make sure the camera ends in the appropriate location, and a good indicator for that is the line that displays the camera movement. As you can see, it matches for both trajectories. You don't have to be overly precise though, since the combat system will configure the camera blending and you can fine-tune that too. I'll talk more about this in a moment. Okay, now let's find some appropriate spots after each attack to add the camera shakes. I can do that following the same approach, moving the animation to the desired frame, clicking the add button on the camera, and adding the camera shakes that we created a moment ago. You can always preview everything by clicking on the scene camera and pressing play. An important note here, if your character animation starts misbehaving, playing a bit weirdly, skipping frames, you can just change to another map and switch back to this one. Reloading the scene should fix that. Now this asset is done. Let's save everything, add this asset to the execution ability, and go back to the gameplay test scene. If we press play now, the camera should animate as expected. There you go. Let's talk about another asset used by the Opportunity Attack ability, the Camera Anchor class. This class provides the camera that will actually play the animation. So the blend happens from the character camera to this one. You can use the base class provided by the framework, or a subclass or blueprint with additional things, for example post-processing effects or other cosmetics. Yet another important aspect for this whole camera system is the player camera manager. The combat system provides its own camera manager that you can set to your controller. But if you need to use a different camera manager, you can add the Combat Camera Manager interface to it and implement the play and stop combat camera animation functions. So to summarize, we need to configure the player camera manager with the appropriate interface. Then set this camera manager to the player controller used by the game. Create a camera anchor if you need one. Create any camera shakes that you want to use with your camera animation. The camera animation asset, which is done using the sequencer, and then configure the Opportunity Attack ability. One final thing that I briefly mentioned before is the blending settings. You can configure how the blending happens between the player camera and the anchor camera in the Opportunity Attack ability. For that, you need to implement the build camera animation parameters in the gameplay ability and configure the settings as you see fit. Right here, I'm just using the default settings, so I don't need this method right now. Very well, this completes the Opportunity Attack topic, and also the first part of the series, where we cover the basics of gas, input, and combat plugins. In the next part, or season, I like to show more complex parts of the combat system and start the integration with the inventory system. So we can do things like switching weapons, use a bow, use projectiles, and so on and so forth. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.